Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Well, I got my virtual conference started yesterday, which I alluded to in the past couple of weeks. The webinar, which is the first of 12 spread out over 10 days, went fine. Great panelists, great topic. The attendees had plenty of questions for them to answer. I've got 2 more to host today, plus I really need to get a run in before I lose my mind. So let's get to this week's show. My guest this time around is Lisa Kohn, author of the disturbing but hopeful memoir To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under the Influence, from Heliotrope Books. Lisa was born in the 60s to hippie parents, and the book chronicles how her mother brought her and her brother up in the Unification Church, which those of us of a certain age know as the Moonies, after the church's founder, the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. The thing was, Mom kind of abandoned the kids once she brought them into the church, only seeing them irregularly. So they also split time with their dad, who was this East Village bartender who kept copious amounts of drugs around and had a somewhat permissive attitude towards all of life, not to mention parenting. So that's harrowing in and of itself. But Lisa doesn't just relate her own childhood perspectives in the book, but she also evokes the bizarre times in which they all took place, like the squalor of Manhattan, the mass weddings that the Moonies held at Madison Square Garden and Yankee Stadium, the weird isolation of suburban New Jersey, and just that 70s thing with cults and that need to belong that sort of ties into the previous conversation I had with Kurt Anderson about his recent books on America's history and what the 60s into 70s meant culturally. So she really lays that out from a personal perspective. The thing is, she manages to get into those weirder aspects of the Unification Church and its practices, and it's a cult, but she does it without turning the book into a screed or a diatribe. She gives us a sympathetic perspective of who she was within the church and the people she knew as individuals, even as she's a girl hitting puberty who's been indoctrinated into a pretty warped set of beliefs and spends years extricating herself from that and not really knowing where that sort of upbringing begins or ends and where she begins. And the same thing with her father and that part of the relationship. So just trying to identify herself amidst all the craziness and the lives she was brought up around. It's a pretty interesting book. So To the Moon and Back, she plumbs the depths, not just the proverbial sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but also anorexia, bad relationships, suicidal ideation, and the shadow of this cult looming behind her. How she manages to rise above all that, and she does, makes for a really impressive life story. And Lisa does a great job of putting it all on the page. So go check it out. Read To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under the Influence, and then be thankful your upbringing wasn't that bad, all things considered. Now, here's Lisa's bio from the flap copy of To the Moon and Back. There's a more extensive one at her website. Lisa Kohn writes, Lisa Kohn is the author of To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under the Influence, as well as The Power of Thoughtful Leadership. She is a writer, teacher, and public speaker who owns a leadership consulting and executive coaching firm. She will always tell you that she is a native New Yorker, but she currently lives in Pennsylvania with her husband and 2 children whenever they're around. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Lisa Kohn. When did you feel you were ready to write The Moon and Back?
Oh, that's an interesting answer. I guess I'm going to say that a lot. So to start, right, the way I describe my childhood, the best seats I ever had at Madison Square Garden were at my mother's wedding. My mom was married on July 1st, 1982, with 2,075 other couples in a mass wedding by Reverend Sun Myung Moon. I grew up as a Moonie. On the other hand, the best cocaine I ever had was from my father's friend, the judge. So that's my childhood. And I say that because fast forward, my early 20s, I end up in Al-Anon, a 12-step program for people who have their arms around an alcoholic, while the alcoholic has their arms around a bottle. And I tell my story there. And as my brother likes to say, when you sit in a room with like hundreds of people and they all have these incredible stories and you tell your story and their jaws all drop, you go, oh. And so, like, wow.
Yes, I wasn't as run-of-the-mill as I thought.
I guess that's just weird, right? It's a little weird. Yeah. So, and then people just used to come up and say to me, oh my God, what a story. You should write a book. You should write a book. So fast forward further, I am a leadership consulting and executive coach, and I decide that I will write a hopeful book, a book to teach, right? So I start writing a half memoir, half self-help, kind of here's what happened to me, how it messed me up. I got better. You can too. And I get incredible rejections from agents for a very long time. Unbelievable story. You're a decent writer. You can't sell a hybrid. You're not famous enough. Where will they put you in Barnes and Noble? And then you didn't know this was this long an answer. And
this is what I want to hear. Yeah.
And then in about 2009, I think I get a call from an agent who says, if you write a memoir, it says the first part, right? You can't write this hybrid. If you write a memoir, I will represent you. And I write the memoir in the space of probably under a year. And by the time I finish, she's, got a huge job and won't take me on. That's the second agent I lost. There was a third one after that. And then in 2016, I went to the Writers Conference, and I went to a Writers Conference in New York City and met the publisher at Heliotrope Books. And she liked me and I liked her, danced around for a while, and then the book was published by Heliotrope Books in 2018. I don't even remember what the exact question you asked me was, but that's the story of how the book came to be.
Well, the sense that you were ready to write it, as opposed to telling the story, as you've said, in sessions, I'm sure with therapists also, you've talked through the story, but when did you feel it was something you could write and with everything that means in terms of sharing through publication as opposed to sharing through, one-on-ones and group conversation?
So you're going to laugh at me. I don't think I ever really thought it through. So one, yes, I told my story multiple times. One of the scars of my childhood is if you put something in front of me, I will do it no matter what, really well. I may pass out or die, but that's fine. Literally, my brother has recently deemed me the wee little engine that will perfectly no matter what, right? So a kind of that goal got put out there, and I was like, I'm in, I'm doing it. And I just did it, and I wrote it, and then I, pushed for it to be published all the many years that took, and I kept trying, and I kept trying, and I kept trying. And then it came out, and I was like, oh, shoot. If you Google me, if you Google Lisa Kohn with the last name being Kohn, I still think I'm the first 3 pages in Google because cults are hot and I got a lot of publicity. And so all of a sudden, and I'm fine with it, but I don't I own a consulting firm and I will walk into someone's office meeting them for the first time and they'll say, oh, I Googled you. And I'm like, great, I grew up in a cult. What else do you want to know? So it's been very freeing, but I didn't, I outed my brother. My dad had my brother smoking pot at the age of 10. Everybody knows that, right? He didn't give me, he gave me permission, but I didn't really think through what it would mean to tell it. Afterwards, I am thrilled I've told it, and I'm pushing it to spread a message of hope and self-love and compassion, and to reach other people who may not have as weird a child as I do, but are still walking around thinking there's something wrong with them when there isn't. But I didn't. And I have no reason to be a decent writer. I've been told that it's written decently, and I loved writing. I just sat down and I loved writing, and I loved editing. The only writing instruction I ever had was Frank McCourt in high school, which doesn't really count. I didn't pay attention. But so I loved writing. I loved editing. I loved creating. I loved crafting the story. I loved learning that whole process. Then I put it out and I went, what the blank did I just do?
Now, is there a sense that the writing helped you? I mean, you talk about how you want the book to help others. Was that version of telling the story? I don't mean version as in making it up. I just mean, codifying it in this way.
I really didn't make much of it up. No.
Oh, trust me. I have a bit in the next zine that I'm publishing about how I was recently asked to do a 2 truths and a lie thing for a documentarian, and melted down because I'm incapable of telling a lie, where the truths I came up with are so absolutely bizarre. No one's going to believe those anyway. I'm like, but I can't actually make something up. I honest, my father literally handed me a shotgun once and told me to wait in the other room in case something happens, ... That's normal as far as my upbringing went. And this was in my 20s. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But, as far as the writing of it, did it help you in terms of getting even more perspective on things? Or again, was it more of an external benefit you were seeing helping others with the course of writing it?
So that's going to be a real yes and no. The no is, one, I'd already told it. It'd already been cathartic. It wasn't. And also what I thought I realized from writing the book. So I joined the church at a very young age. I see all my brothers and sisters, all the members working really hard. I feel worthless, like I can do nothing for God. So I decide that I will actively be like the best little sister and love everybody and take care of everybody. And that's what I'm going to do. And flash forward to my life now. I'm very loving. I mean, it's how I define myself, as love. So I thought, I think I got that from being in the church. But in the process of the book coming out, I reconnected with my friends growing up in the church, including Moon's daughter. And I said that to them, and all 3 of them were like, no, you were always like that. So no. But the yes, what I did learn was I was able, good and bad, right, to see the good and the bad both. Meaning, look at certain people. There's certain people in this story who are really, really destructive to me. And to this day, when I hear from this person, this man, he's still destructive to me. But his love kept me from committing suicide, right? Like there's like this, the craziness of my dad was craziness, but it kept us, it gave us an out when my brother and I finally needed and wanted to leave the church. The craziness of the cult was insanity, but it was a haven when I got there. And it also saved, if my dad had my brother smoking pot at the age of 10, my brother certainly could have easily gone down and been a heroin addict at a very young age. Like he was on that path. And the only rule we got about drugs was don't ever shoot up smack on 2nd Avenue because you will pass out and it's dangerous. If you want to shoot up smack, come upstairs. If it's speed, you're fine downstairs, but smack, make sure you come upstairs. So those were our rules, right? But those, so the church kind of saved us from that. So it just forced me to look at like the good and the bad, the duality of so much of it. That's what I got.
Mm-hmm. So I guess now the book's been out for a bit. How have your friends or contacts who are still within the church responded to it or reacted to it? And how have your friends who are no longer part of the church reacted to it? How are people reacting to the book, I guess is a great way of putting it, but especially the people you knew through the church?
Yeah. Since the book has been out, it's been an amazing, incredible journey for me in so many ways. So the people in the church, I've gotten in contact with almost everyone in the book. Most of them are out of the church. so like I've heard a few things from people in the church, but not from anyone I know, not very much. I got trolled a couple of times when it first came out. But so I've like, it's been like radio silence, which is fine. Like Reverend's daughter, Inja Moon, I haven't seen her since it came out. I haven't actually talked to her. Like we've texted back and forth. She knew it was coming. We never talked about the fact that it came. I don't know what she thinks. For the people who are out, who I've reconnected with, there's, love and appreciation for telling this story. And then there's, those of us who are born and or raised are what we're called second generation, second gens, or third or fourth or fifth. And through this process, I found this community of second gens from my cult and second gens from a lot of other places who are, they're carved so identically as me. We are, because of the way we were raised, we are so similar. Like our brains are carved in these specific ways. And there's been incredible camaraderie, support for each other, and, dare I say, admiration for being able to actually tell the story and get it out there, because it's hard for a lot. I don't know why it wasn't hard for me to tell, but it's obviously hard for a lot of people, as you said, to tell their stories.
Well, again, I'm sure everybody has, as you show, your path out of it, where you even say in the book, there wasn't I can't say this is the day I decided I was no longer part of the church. It feels like a 2-year process, like you say, from ages 18 to 20, where you're making that transition.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating in those terms, especially when you contrast it, not to give away any spoilers, with your mother's departure from it, I guess.
Yeah, we're still working on that one. Yeah, so as my brother says, I never left. I just slowly drifted away. Whereas he, at the end of high school, college, set my mom down and said, that's it, I'm done. So, but I never did that. And then my mom in 1996, so I just slowly drifted away. I think it was even longer than 2 years. Whereas my brother, he went to Duke University in New Jersey, and there were Moonies who knew him at his school, then watching him. So, but as soon as he got out at the end of senior year, he sat my mom down and he's like, that's it, I'm out. And I classically have never said I'm out. I'm obviously not in, but I've never said it. And then my mom left the church in 1996 when my older child was born, but left and never looked back, never kind of processed it, didn't seem to have a hard time with it. Just kind of like, okay, I'm done, moving on, which is unfathomable to me, unfathomable, whichever it is, right? And is slowly now maybe starting to look at it 24 years later. But I think I did. I read in the book, because I read it over recently. Like, as easily as she joined, she walked in, she walked out very easily. Whereas it wasn't at all easy, and it's not an easy thing to do. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Do you see, when you're in touch with other people who've left, or other second gen people in general, which of the two is more common? Is it more like you're drifting away in general, or do people really make hard breaks generally with either the church or other, we'll say, cults? It's okay to use the C word, right?
It's okay to use the C word for me. Absolutely. In some places it's a compliment. Yes. So, it really varies. So in the cult survivor network, I guess, for lack of a better term, there's a definition between someone being physically in or out, mentally in or out, and emotionally in or out. So someone can be physically in and mentally and emotionally out, and somebody can be physically out and still mentally and emotionally in. So it like really varies how it happens, how long it happens, if it's sudden or not. What I can tell you, right? Like, there is nothing as intoxicating as knowing the truth, quote, in parents, even if it's not true. But when you know it to be absolutely true, it is the best. I've done a couple drugs. It's the best drug ever. And to walk away from that is terrifying, and also really hard to do, because our brain, first of all, in a cult, using that C word, you are taught, like we were taught, that if we ever questioned anything, it's Satan trying to win us back from God. And, mankind for 6,000 years has been breaking God's heart. And the last thing you want to do is to fail God like everybody else failed God. So as soon as you question or doubt or have a thought or don't want to do something, you're possessed by Satan, and you like take a cold shower and beat yourself and pray for 20 minutes. Like, it's terrifying. So you're taught never to do it. And then our brains, that wonderful cognitive dissonance in our brains. And I was actually having this conversation with my mom when I explained to her the actual evils of the church I've learned in the last few years. And she says to me, well, if that's true, why does so-and-so still belong, right? The cognitive dissonance, our brains work to keep us believing what we already believe, right? So you not only have to push against with how the cult has told you never to doubt, but then you have to push against your own brain, which is clinging to the beliefs because, again, we like to know we're sane, and so we work to believe what we believe. So it's just not. And yeah, so then my mom just walked away and started a new life. I'm like, what the? That's like not fair, not true, right? Deal with it, yeah. So.
And I wonder if it's more prevalent with adults who enter as opposed to someone, again, the second gens like you, the people who, when you're brought into this sort of thing, your brain is much more plastic and you're much more susceptible to having this stuff wired into you.
Yeah, I think it is very different. It still can be difficult, right? So I just, as I'm parading my way through all the cult documentaries and series out there, I just watched The Vow. And I've seen it with other ones as well. When you can watch like these people who have joined something and then realize what it is and finally, find a way to pull out, and you can see the horror on their faces when they realize that they were duped, right? Like that how did they believe and why did they do and all of that. So that's true. Yeah. But those of us who are like, literally when I was on Megyn Kelly, when the book came out, back when there was a Megyn Kelly show, and the producer interviewed me for the backstory, and he said, were you brainwashed? And I said, I didn't have a brain to be washed. I was pickled in this stuff, right? So when you are raised in it, it really does. I mean, they've really done research that shows really specific things in the way our brains process information and think things and feel things and whatever. So yeah, that is harder to, and also, first, someone who's joined a cult has an identity to go back to. Someone who is raised in it doesn't have anything to go back to, and is walking away from everything they know, often, in many cults, like shunned by their family or written off or all of that, and doesn't have a, like, who is Lisa? I don't know. Who's Lisa? I don't know. To go back to, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what I sort of wondered over the course of the book, like how much parsing you do to try to figure out, what the essential Lisa is under all that. How, like, what percentage comes from the church, what percentage comes from, your dad's craziness and everything else. And then what you end up finding is yourself at the end, what that all constitutes.
It is still a fascinating process, right? Yeah, sure. I'm still, I was saying to someone recently, I think I'm going through adolescence, right? Because I never really did. So I'm still, finding there is good for my dad. There's really not so much good for my dad, right? There's good for my mom and the cult. There's really not so good, right? And then what if that is in them? What if that influenced me? What if that influence do I want to keep? And what is the real me? And, what does she want? And who does she like? And how does she feel? And I literally will, if I'm in therapy, I will literally say to my therapist, really? Other people can think that? She's like, yeah, other people think that. Like, really? Like, my brain's like, how do you have that thought without like things exploding or falling apart? Like, yeah. So I'm still putting together the pieces that I was supposed to get a couple of years ago. So it's fun and exciting every day.
Do you pause when you're writing the word God to do it in lowercase? I know you have a section near the end where you have God as a lowercase God, but do you pause for a moment with, is it going to be trouble if I use lowercase or do I have to go with uppercase here because I've got this thing in my head?
That is a really good, because I do pause, but I thought not for that reason. And then as you said it, I was like, I said to someone recently, just about everyone I know who has left something like this, like there's at least one moment in the back of your head, you go, what if I die and I find out it was all right? what if I really pissed God off? Right. Yeah. And then I'm like, I don't think so anymore. But so it is a very, and when people say, what do I believe? I said, I believe in love. My God is a small g. My God uses pronouns they. But there are parts of my brain that are going, what? What'd you say? What? Don't say that. Yeah, they're still there. They're still, those control systems. They They think they saved my life. And this is actually what I teach as a coach, right? I learned things and made up things and rules and guidelines and practices and whatever. And they either saved my life, or at least I think they saved my life. And so they still think I need saving, and they're saving my life. And they still kick up to when the book first came out, I realized I could not speak negatively about Moon. Like literally,
Yeah.
I would not be able to talk. My brain would just shut. It's taken me 2.5 years to be able to do that. So there are definitely these carvings in my brain that kick up to think it's self-protection. So I have to be like, that like, oh, it's okay, honey. It's okay. I'm the adult. If you're safe, I have to do all those silly little things they teach us to do.
Well, even within the book, you're not derisive towards the church exactly. Yeah. I don't mean it as a, you're hemming and hawing. I just mean you don't treat it dismissively, and you don't come at it from present day Lisa's perspective of, how could I have possibly believed X, Y, and Z? You're treating it in the moment as you're narrating, but also, you show how it can be not appealing necessarily, but how the appeal that it has for a person in need, or a person who doesn't know, to pursue something else, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, so people often say you don't make the church look bad. And I say, I only wrote what I experienced. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I experienced some messed up, wacky things in the church, but not overt physical abuse, sexual abuse. I don't know what exactly people are looking for. Like, my interactions with men were never negative. Like, I did not experience external negative. I don't, yes, some, whatever. I didn't. So I wrote what I experienced, right? It's only in the last few years I've learned so many of the real not so good stuff about it. I'm lucky I didn't know it when I wrote it, because I don't know how that would have influenced me. But again, I wrote what I knew. And when we joined, it was a haven. It was safety. It was love. My mom was more stable, as weird as that sounds, right? So it was a good thing, even though it wasn't a good thing. And so that, I mean, and mind you, and people say that you don't give it up, you don't talk harshly about it. I'm like, look at there. It is a cult. It is wrong. Like, you do not want to believe like that. And it gave me something that I needed. And that is absolutely true. So yes, that is, I could only say I only wrote what happened to me, right? I couldn't write the stories of what happened to other people, really, because it wasn't me.
And you mentioned sometimes when you show up at a client, they've Googled your name and found the book and everything else. How do people react nowadays to the Mooney history? Because I grew up northern New Jersey also. So, all the Madison Square Garden, I think Yankee Stadium stuff also, we've remembered the mass marriages and everything else. And it was weird, but, it all seemed to kind of dissipate or disappear for us over the 80s, 90s, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, how do people react to you're a Mooney? So,
we're of the age now that people are like, what's a Mooney?
Yeah.
It always just cracks me up. I'm like, wait, how old are you? Someone asked me the other day, with what I do, what I public speaker and a consultant and a coach, and so I very rarely, everything I learned to heal absolutely is what I use in my work. But I very rarely actually talked about it, because my story is a sort that literally sucks air out of a room. I was once at a conference and the guy next to me had polio, and then I shared my story, and nobody cared that this man had polio, right? Because I was in a cult. So I would never share it. And then once it came out, it was like, yep, absolutely, grew up in a cult. Yep, ended up in Al-Anon. Here, let me help you, right? It just made it so easily, and like people are always like, wow. And then they move on. Or luckily I get from clients things like, one client once said, we always knew you were good at what you did. Now we know why, right? Because my experience absolutely, when you go back to it, it's made who I am. I can't hate any part of my childhood, maybe little pieces here and there, right? But I can't say, oh, God, I wish that never happened, because who I am is because of all of that. And I've come to learn and love and, like who I am. So, so now I'm like, that's my past. Okay, now let's talk about you.
It's better than me. I do this on the weekends and such, and occasionally people in my day-to-day life look up my name, which is uncommon enough that, this is the first thing to show up. And, there are times it's, so how did you end up a lobbyist for this weird part of the pharmaceutical sector? Or, why do you do this on the weekends? Either side doesn't really understand how the other one came into existence. But yeah, that's what life does to us, though.
That's what life does to you, right? And it all makes you you, and how do you integrate it, and how do you use it, or what parts do you share or not? Yeah, it's all, that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah. Now, who were your influences when it comes to writing and to memoir? Are there particular authors you were not emulating, but ones that you thought, this is the style I'm trying to achieve?
Let's see, there's Mary Carr. And Mary Carr.
I figure that's always the important one.
I love Anne Lamott's writing as well. I mean, when she wrote Leaving the Saints, talk about leaving the Mormon Church, obviously stuff that resonated with me. I read a lot of stuff, but my God, if that was my biggest influence. I read them all, read them over. I'm trying to think of the other ones. I will tell you that this will make fun of myself because it is an amazing book. Let's start with that. When the agent called me and said, "I want to represent you," the famous words I said was, "Well, I don't want to write another Glass Castle." To which she famously said, "You should be so lucky as to write another Glass Castle." So I will definitely say Jeanette Walls, but I wanted to write something that was really hopeful and had meaning and purpose at the end. I wanted to take it like one step further than she did, but yeah, that's how stupid I can be sometimes.
I know, but we don't know those things. Like you said, you were new to publishing in some respects. And you don't get the,
like, oh, that was an idiot thing to say. I'm like, okay, you're right. Yep, I can do that. Yeah.
But you mentioned, again, putting the story in print and, your brother taking it or understanding it in certain ways. And he mentions that you're too soft on some people also. But what about your kids, leveling with your kids about your history, not just the church, but the drug use and everything else that was part of your life?
Always a good question. So I have two children. And we had decided that, so both my mother and my father are in my life and in my kids' lives, right? And so we had decided that, the age of 16, like before that arbitrary age, 16 was old enough to know the story. Before then, it really probably wasn't a good idea. Like they knew stuff happened. But my older child used to say, "My mom's writing a memoir. She had a bad childhood. That's all I'm allowed to know." Right. But 16 was this arbitrary age. And so when my older child was around that age, literally we're driving to New York or up towards New York to see friends of mine from college. And I turned to my kid and I say, "Here's the deal. I will tell you anything. I will tell you everything." This is before, because there's still just a manuscript, but you never actually need to know. If you don't want to know, I will never tell you the story. That's fine. And my kid looks at me and goes, "Tell me the story." I'm like, "Now?" And so I'm driving, staring ahead, doing the 50,000 foot version. And I finish and my child says, "Wow, Papa kind of saw that coming. Mimi never saw that coming," right? Because they teach you about drugs and sex and drinking in school. They don't teach you about religious cults. And, my dad still, at that point, he's not well now, but he still had that aura, if you will. And my mom at that point had been out, left when my child was born. And so had been out for a very long time. And you didn't have any pictures of Asian people in her house anymore. So that's my older child. And I can tell you, and this is true for both of them, and I'll tell you the story of the younger one because he's even funnier, but they've read it, but they haven't really taken it in which is good, right? So my older child, when the book came out, I went out to Minneapolis where my kid is, and I was doing a reading, and I said, "Here's the deal. I'm probably going to cry. I'm probably going to say I healed by having you. And, is that okay?" And my kid looks at me and says, "Wow, I read it, but I don't think I actually took it in," which again is absolutely fine because they need to know the details, but it's me, their parent, right, who all this happened to, and their grandparents who were not good parents. So it's like, take it with a big buffer. And my younger child, he was just about 16 too, and the book was on its way to get published. And he says, "I want to read the book." And I say, "Great, you can read it. But before you do, I have to tell you the story and you actually have to listen to me." To which he says, "Yeah, it's not worth it." Like a week later, I'm like, "Okay, here's the deal. I won't tell you the story. you can read it, but each chapter we're just going to talk about afterwards. And he looks at me and he goes, still not worth it. And then he picked up a postcard that had the line about Madison Square Garden and the best cocaine. And he reads it, and I say, well, okay, now I need to tell you because I did drugs. And he's like, well, I've heard that line before. I'm like, great. So we go out to dinner, and again, I give him the 50,000th version. At the end, he goes, so your childhood was just like mine then, huh? Because he's wonderfully sarcastic. But like a couple weeks later, he goes to spend a weekend alone with my mother, which he had never done, right? He always went with, the older kid or whatever, or all of us. So he spends a weekend with my mom, and he comes back, and he says, I don't know how to be with Mimi. He's like, I don't. And I said, here's the deal. Not a good mother, a really good grandmother. Okay, good. Like a really good grandmother. Absolutely separate. You have a relationship with her. You love her. What happened between me and her is none of, it's good that it never doesn't matter. And so that's, again, how they kind of take it. It's like, there's this story. I will also tell you, when he first started reading it, he had just read The Glass Castle, and I said, it's been kind of it had been compared to The Glass Castle. Lucky, I'm very lucky, I know. And he's first reading, he goes, this is really good. And then like a few weeks go by, and I say to him, no pressure, just let me know when you finish it. He goes, well, I finished it a while ago. You ruined it for me by telling me this story, so I kind of got bored. Right, but that's he does it with the humor, right? They just keep it at a distance so that they. It's good for them to know. He loves to make jokes about the church, and we love when we play Anomia and it comes up with a religious figure and they both get moon, and they're they know how to use it to shock people that their mom was raised in a cult. But again, they keep it at a distance so that so they don't have to let it in too much.
And I mean, it puts me in mind of what we were talking about earlier in terms of the essentialness of you. Or the essence of you was in the book. I mean, there's key moments at Cornell where you diverge from suicide into something else, but that still seems to be, like a dialectic thing where you're moving away from something as opposed to becoming something. Whereas once you become a parent, that really seems to, or a mother especially, that seems to be, in the narrative, the moment of self-definition, I guess. Yeah. That's the moment where you're really able to question your own mother.
Oh yeah.
And I just, not something as simplistic as, becoming a mother fulfills you and makes you a person. But, I wonder about that sense of parenting, both as a curative for your own upbringing and this sense of helping define or redefine who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I do say I healed. I do know I healed by loving my children because it was a combination of giving what I never got, realizing what I never got, right? And but feeling it, at least feeling it from the other side. But I literally, when my older kid went off to college, I said to a friend, so if you're close to your parents and you leave, what happens? How do these relations, right? Because I didn't know. So it was that, and it was just, giving it to myself, feeling with them, and the knowledge that I could, right? I let's talk about my brother for a minute. We both walked into parenthood thinking, oh my God, what if I do the same thing? The wonderful thing about my parents is the bar is so low, it's really easy to do better, right? Woo! But, what if I leave? What if I leave? Because I was left, right? What if I don't, leave in another way? So it really, and I do define myself as love. And I do believe that actually moving into the church, it was the love I first got there that quote unquote saved me, and getting out of the church, it was the love of my friends and the love I found outside that saved me, right? I do believe that is really the essence of who I am and what I'm about, but it is so embodied in the feeling for my children and being able to love that deeply and give that deeply. Although here's another story about my son. He never listened to this. He doesn't like when I talk about him, which is why I say that. He never listened, but before he went to college, he was sitting in the kitchen. I came downstairs. I said, I was interviewed. I talked about you. He said, well, what'd you say? I said, well, I said that I healed by, raising you. And I said that the only thing that mattered when I had kids was that my kids knew that they were loved, because I did not know, for a variety of reasons, that either my mother nor my father loved me, right? I just wanted my kids to know that they were loved. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, I don't know you love me. I mean, I know Dad loves me, and I know Mimi loves me, and Papa loves me, but I don't know you love me. And I'm like, yes, I've done it so well that he can say that to me, right? I know that actually he is annoyed by how much I, gush over him, right? And my older kid teases that I will pet. I pet my kids when they come home, like, oh, you're here, I got to touch you, I'm going to sit on you, right? Yeah, it is.
So you mentioned the Vow. Do you watch a bunch of cult documentaries? And do you rate them as those guys are bikers compared to what we had?
So I didn't watch any. They can be quite triggering. I didn't even know that, like, this whole cult awareness, cult survivor, I didn't know that any of it was there. And so getting involved in that community has been so incredibly amazing for me. But also that's when people started talking to me about the different documentaries. And there's a possibility that some might happen around some of the stuff I'm in. So that's when I started watching them more, like more and more and more of them. And it is a weird, fascinating experience to do as someone who's been in. There are some, I think, do it way too sensationalist. There's some, I think, that don't, make it seem like it's too easy to leave. I can give you names if you want, right? And there's some I'm like, yeah, they captured it. They captured that fervent belief, right? And the inability to see, like, that anything's wrong because you have that fervent belief, right? And so, yeah, I do absolutely critique how well they capture, because people on the outside are like, whoa, no, but like, that's weird that you were. I'm like, no, everybody. Actually, I was told recently, unless you are a sociopath, have psychosis, or in another, controlling environment at the wrong time, everybody's susceptible, right? We crave certainty, purpose, and community, and a cult gives you absolute certainty, purpose beyond belief, and a community you will never find again, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the. I was thinking of the Leah Remini, Scientology, the ongoing series of getting out of that, and that's what struck me in the scenes in Cornell where you are nervously walking by the Unification Church's little tabletop thing, and even when you're in New York and you're worried they're going to see you with your boyfriend, and
I would literally see someone selling flowers at the end of the block and like drop his hand and cross the street or something and meet him up a block away. Because the sin and the shame of leaving. Yeah.
So how did it lead to coaching?
That's a good question. So I, finished Cornell, put it all aside, pretend nothing happened, got a job in advertising and ended up in entertainment advertising, and was looking for a small division of gray advertising, and bored beyond my belief. The boss would have moved me off of my account, whatever, and ended up convincing me to send me for an executive MBA at Columbia, where I went and discovered these disciplines about people, right, and fell in love with it. At the same time, when I was at Gray, that's when I was engaged to the alcoholic, and my life completely imploded. And I first get into program going, tell me if he's an alcoholic. There's no way I would ever be with an alcoholic. And I start to rip everything apart and start to build myself. And this is all going on. And I finished my degree, and I left the job where I was miserable and got another job and was more miserable, and was in therapy one day and said, that's it, I quit. I should have always been an artist. I don't know why I'm in the corporate world. I'm going to be a photographer. And she looks at me and she goes, well, you just got your MBA and you were number one in your class. Maybe you want to be a consultant? So in 1995, 3 months pregnant, I got a little single, like, to be a consultant. And I had a couple professors who gave me a job just facilitating and doing different stuff. And then literally I was in front of a client once, and she came up to me. I was doing a leadership program, a communications program, in front of the client, and the president of the agency came up to me afterwards and said, I want to be you. Do you coach? And I went, yeah, called my coach. And that was in the late 90s, and that's when I got certified to be a coach. And it's all this one big circle because I am the, coach and consultant to Fortune 50 C-suite leaders. And I'll talk about love and self-love and acceptance and healing and, the evil twins in our head and all that stuff, because I absolutely bring everything I learned in order to show up and be happy and okay to, again, very few people have the same story as I do. Only my brother. Like, it's a weird, crazy story with both these worlds, but everybody just about is walking around with something. Yeah. Shame they shouldn't have, trauma from their childhood, misbeliefs about themselves and the world, right? And God, if we can crack those open and let a little more light and joy into life, I'm lucky to do what I do.
Mm-hmm. And you've written a memoir that I love the badge on your website that lists it as bestseller in dysfunctional families category.
I forgot it said that up there. Yeah, like, woohoo!
I'm number one with the dysfunctional. Yeah, that's it.
Well, I always say, if both your parents have apologized to you about leaving you with the other one, what does that say about your childhood? Because they both have been like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was so bad with him, with her. Like, yeah great.
Yeah, we've got the similarity of a friend of mine once said, I used to think you were raised by wolves, but now I think wolves would have been better.
Right. That's exactly the beginning of my book, right? Because my brother always says we were raised by wolves. And literally one of my dad's friends who's in the book said, oh, no, wolves gave their kids much more structure than your parents gave you. Yeah. Like, great. Thanks. You were there to watch. Excellent. Yeah. So I feel for you. Now, one day you're going to tell me your story.
Oh yeah, no, trust me, I've got stuff we could share. Generally, I do it off mic. I tease on mic, but the really heavy duty stuff I toss when nobody's recording. But tell me about
it's probably a better idea.
Oh yeah, with some of the aspects of my day job, I figure it's better to keep a little of this stuff private, as it were. But tell me about your New York, because you're a little bit older than me. And I've always lived about 25 miles from New York. So I live in the house I grew up in. So I always had New York. It's weird. I know, freaks people out. But New York's 25 miles away. That's always been the, going in, coming back out, but never, a place to live. And the New York that you evoke, especially that, East Village, verging on Alphabet City, 70s into 80s, which was hell on earth.
Back before it was cool, when it was just seedy. Yeah.
Yes, in between the two burned out buildings, as I recall from. Yes,
that's where I lived on Fifth Street. Yep, that's what we say. Yeah, it's down the block, in between the two burned out buildings. People are like, okay, I found your house. Okay, good. Yeah. I was exposed to New York forever. Right, when I was very young, my dad, when my parents split, he moved there, and we would go visit him, and I always hated it, and I was always terrified of it. And when we moved in, when everything fell, when my mom left us, and then my grandfather kind of got locked up with a nervous breakdown, and we finally ended up with Danny in the East Village, there was no place I wanted to be left. He was Satan. The East Village was evil. Everything he did was sinful. It was like awful. And then, fast forward as I start to leave, New York City is, back when it was seedy and grimy, it is like it's in my very being. I feel like I step onto the pavement. I'm like, okay, I can relax now. We'll travel. And people say, where are you from? My husband's like, we live outside of Philly. I always say, but I'm from New York. Like, just so you know, it's the first thing. This is, many years ago, my older child was not so cool and hip, and we were in New York City, and we'd walk down the High Line, and we're in this really trendy place in the meatpacking district. Go figure that everything just come trendy, right? And we're sitting there, and my kid says, "Do you think I could move into New York?" And I look at this kid and I go, not really, not yet. Like, you're just not cool enough. Like, after a while, you'd be cool enough, but like, yeah, I don't think so. And my kid's like, I think he was supposed to say, "Of course, honey, of course." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you're not cool enough." You're like,
yeah, we're just going to be blunt
get there, but you're not. Like, no. And so, as my kid says, first a New Yorker, second a parent. like I'm going to be honest, you are not cool enough to go to my city.
I think that's good coaching too. I think you're coaching while you're helping them to aspire to something without just giving them the reward right away. Yeah,
absolutely. I wouldn't want you to go out there and like be eaten by the wolves. So New York. Yeah, it will always, for some weird, it will always be home. It just feels like home to me.
How's the
it's
city
so
changed?
changed. It's
That's
so
what I was going to
changed.
say. How's it changed for? Because it's become so. I mean, again, the High Line.
Oh,
The money that's everywhere.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
How
The money
different
that's
New York is.
everywhere. It's sad and it's horrific. And the way I describe it is when the book came out, I had a reading on the East Village, like on 4th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues, just pretty much catty corner from the building we grew up in. And I was walking down from someone's apartment in the 30s where I'd stayed, and my brother, Robbie, was coming up. He took the subway down to the 2nd Avenue stop, and he's walking up, and he's texting me. And his texts are like, what?
Yeah.
Because he hadn't been there in about 10 years. And so, like, here's all these seedy, decrepit, fraying buildings with, like, a gourmet food store and a CC gallery and, like, coats selling for $1,000. And Robbie's like, what? I'm like, yeah, welcome back to the new East Village. So I mean, I still love New York. There's very little of it that was like what it was. I mean, when I was in college, I was on the summers, I'd be home living in the East Village, waitressing in Soho every morning. And I could not go outside and walk anywhere in the East Village, West Village, or Soho and not run into people I knew, right? Because it was a community. It was different.
It was a neighborhood. Yeah.
It was a neighborhood. Yeah, it was a neighborhood. My dad used to say there's no life above 14th Street. Like you just stay downtown. Everything's downtown. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend who lived 84th in Amsterdam, Upper West Side. And when you mentioned the apartment in the West 90s, I think 90th in Amsterdam or something like that, I just had this moment of, I went back a couple of years ago. He moved away, and I used to, 25 years ago, hang out in that area all the time. Not run down, but not gentrified the way it is now. It
not
is
not gentrified the way it is now. Yeah.
Oh my God. It's just a few years ago. I walked through the neighborhood. I'm like, Chip wouldn't even recognize this neighborhood if I sent him pictures of everything. He wouldn't know what block this was until he saw a street sign. But
it's all the outdoor malls. Yeah.
So the flip side, are you ever going to cope with living in the suburbs?
Never. I mean, it has its pluses. Don't know if I can do it forever. It's Did I answer that a little too quickly?
No, I can't take it. Yeah, that's good.
I mean, maybe forever we'll be here. I'll be somewhere like this, but it's always be like, but just so you know, this is not where I'm from.
And hearing the crickets at night and things like that is still.
Oh, they tease me. I'm like, I've gotten used to that, but I mean, I've been here for a while, but they used to tease me because like in the winter and it gets dark at 7 and it's scary to walk down the block because there's nobody around and there could be boogeymen in the bushes. And everyone here just laughs at me like it's incredibly safe. I'm like, no, 2nd Avenue and 4th Street at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a lot of people around. That's safe. This empty, I am proud that I can do it now, but I still think about it every time I do it.
And worried about getting kidnapped by a cult for a second time.
Exactly. That would, God help me.
It'd be like lightning or something. But
Yeah.
Now, are you thinking of another book? Not that I should ask, because that's a huge jinx to put on people. But you did mention originally the idea of a hybrid memoir and self-help.
Yeah, maybe I'm famous enough to do that now. I would love to. I haven't figured out what yet, and I haven't, because I am trying to spread a message of hope and self-love and really push this book for reasons. I've put a lot of time and energy into keeping this going, and I have a leadership consulting and executive coaching firm, which unfortunately is doing fine. So finding the time for it. But I love writing. I know I want to write again. I just don't know that I want to write about any of my current immediate family. So I'm trying to figure out what to write. So if you have ideas, let me know. I know there will be something because I want to do it again. I just have not made the time to sit down and start it yet. So hopefully yours is a impetus, not a jinx.
Yeah. It's usually if somebody is working on a second book and I ask, that just derails them and they hate me for life. But,
well, see, that's good. And I will never hate you for life. So that's good.
Oh, thank God. Good. Okay. So the last, and I guess, huge and overarching question, how's your pandemic?
Oh my God.
How's 2020 been for you?
2020 sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's literally, I get on the phones with clients and they'll say something like, by the way, right now sucks. So, I mean, in many ways, honestly, it's fine, right? My dad, Danny, got COVID and somehow survived.
Oof.
We figure that's the eighth time or ninth time he should have died and didn't. No one else in my immediate close vicinity has gotten it or gotten it badly. It sucks that my kids are far away, but my kids are fine. You know, my father-in-law has lung cancer, which makes it all more tricky, but we're getting through it. Like, there are people who have really, really, really suffered, and I have not. But it's, you know, I miss hugs. I miss hugs and people very, 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 very much, right? And then on the other hand, all the other stuff that's happened, you know, in the revolution that's happened this year, right? I have to be hopeful. You know, I have a social activist child and soon probably an environmental activist child. My two kids are going different directions. But I have to be hopeful that we are cracking open to change the way things are. And I do feel very lucky. I'm very blessed in my life, but to be very lucky in the work I do to try and help make changes in the difference and supporting some people who are really making changes in the difference. So, yeah, so 2020, I heard someone say once that, you know, in the future, people will write dissertations on like one day in 2020.
But they'd all be the same day.
Right. Oh God, right. Like, well, they call the Blur's Day, right? Yeah, like it's all the same day, but like, who could imagine that all these things that have happened, including what's happening in this last month or so, right? And the insanity of what's going on, right? And all I can say is, you know, I do have a very firm opinion of extremist beliefs, right? That hopefully, you know, things will crack open in a way that actual change can happen. And I personally am going to reveal myself here. And like, I'm glad it was not a landslide in our election because, you know, I wish it had been. But if it had been a landslide, then so many people would be like, all right, we're good now, right? And we're so not good. We're so not good, right? There's so much that needs to be healed and love. So much needs to happen. And people do need to be treated differently. So there you go. That's my dissertation on the pandemic in 2020. Man, what a year. Man, what a year.
Yeah, which actually, I guess, also raises that question, that whole Q thing, like the cult aspects of that. Do you see that overlapping with
QAnon?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
With your cult experience and
yes.
background? Yeah.
Yes. It's you know,
for the same reasons I think you were saying, all the things that it gives you.
Yeah. And when you believe like that, you, like, people say, how do they believe that nonsense? Well, when you believe, first of all, your brain likes to be certain, right? There's so much uncertainty, right? Your brain likes to be certain. And when you believe that certainly, you will do everything to protect that, right? Cognitive dissonance. Your brain will fight to, like, believe lies in order to perpetuate what you believe to be true. So it is absolutely, I mean, the three messages I have with the book are: extremist situations exist. They are prevalent. They are incredibly intoxicating, best drug ever, and they are dangerous. And you can get out and you can stay out. But yes, there are extremist beliefs, white supremacists, like the white supremacists, the terrorists. It's all this extreme belief, and it drives us to do bad things. The second message, since I'm going there, is for anyone who feels hopeless or damaged beyond repair, there is hope, and you are not damaged. When the book came out, I realized that I still thought I was damaged. And I have damage. I have scars. I'm not damaged. It's a very different worldview, right? I have really still some stupid beliefs in me that I'm carving out and getting rid of, but I'm not damaged. And then the third one, you know, from the work I do in my own life, I know that as a species, most of us are way too hard on ourselves, and we need a huge dose of self-love and self-compassion. So that's what I talk about. So yes.
That is a great note to leave off on. The only thing I was going to mention otherwise is that every single one of your music citations in the book overlaps with mine, right down to Squeeze and Pulling Muscles from a Shell, playing on the boombox. Everything you cite, I'm like, well, clearly every one of those songs, you know, vibe with her the same way they vibe with me. So, you know, Lisa's awesome. You know,
thank you. You know, we made a playlist when the book was first coming out, and I mean, I love listening to the playlist because, yeah, it's like, this is the 70s. Have at it. And a little bit of the 80s. Yeah, have at it. Yeah.
Awesome. So, Lisa, thanks so much for coming on. I enjoyed the heck out of To the Moon and Back, and not just for your story, but for the time and everything else you evoke. It's really an amazing piece of work.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been truly an absolute pleasure talking with you.
And that was Lisa Kohn. To the Moon and Back is a pretty harrowing memoir, but like I said at the top, also a hopeful one. I enjoyed the heck out of it, largely for the content, but also for the evocations of that New York and New Jersey and the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the new wave soundtrack that permeates the later parts of the book. Anyway, you can learn more about To the Moon and Back and check out Lisa's blog, her other media appearances, and all sorts of other neat stuff at her site, lisakohnwrites.com. You can also follow Lisa on Twitter and Instagram at Lisa Kohn Writes, all of which is spelled LisaKohnWrites. Her executive coaching gig is chatsworthconsulting.com, and there'll be links to all of that, plus her publisher, Heliotrope Books, in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, in the before time, this is when I would ask you for financial support for the show through Patreon or PayPal. I don't do that anymore because we live in a different world. The support I need is just feedback from you, the occasional letter, email, postcard, or whatever, just to tell me what you like and don't like about the show, or just to tell me how you're doing. If you do have money to spare, I ask that you donate to worthy causes, either foundations or individuals. For individuals, you can look for their Patreons, their Kickstarters, Indiegogos, the GoFundMes, which are pretty important for a lot of people's needs, especially within healthcare. Individual foundations like food banks, freedom funds, the Poor People's Campaign. There are a lot of things you can do to help fix the world right now. So if you're in a position to help, even if it's just a couple of bucks that you can give or time you can give to volunteering, then please help. Now, last word, I still have about 36 copies left of the first issue of my very first zine, Haiku for Business Travelers. I'm working on issue 2, but all of that's pretty much on hold while my brain is taken up with all of this virtual conference stuff. Still, if you want a copy of the first issue, it's free. Just drop me a line or visit haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and fill out the form there. Like I say, free. You can kick in a couple of bucks for postage and production if you want, but don't feel obliged. This is just me sharing my writing, photography, podcast excerpts, and art in general, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY, the number 4, TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.